Sometimes it's just with your family. Here's some more fun with food, so silly that you can't tell who they are. Sometimes being silly with friends is a good idea, and sometimes you wish your friends wasn't silly. But there's some things that in life that aren't silly and should be taken really serious. And I wanted to take a look at this because you see different versions of this presented in many different ways. From bumpers, the textbooks, you see it presented to you again and again. I wish James was here because James would say that his bumper is smarter than a lot of textbooks, and that might be true. But one thing that's interesting about this is this lie is very simple. There's not a lot to it. They say that you go from here to there. But what makes it dangerous is that it's simple and it's just repeated again and again and again. It doesn't have to be a complex lie. As long as you repeat it again and again, people will believe it. But this doesn't just represent an idea of how man came to be. There's a whole worldview behind it. There's people that live their lives and come to great conclusions about things pertaining to important matters of life based behind the thoughts and the beliefs behind this picture. But this worldview is broken. It is very broken. In fact, they cannot answer where matter comes from or where life comes from dead matter. They can't explain where physical laws come from. And in this worldview, there's no answer for absolute morality or absolute justice. And when you think about this, these are some important questions. And about absolute justice, and it's appointed for men to die once, but after this, the judgment. So Christ was offered once to bear the sins of many. To those who eagerly wait for him, he will appear a second time apart from sin for salvation. And after this world's over or after your life is over, all of us is going to stand before God. And I much rather have my faith in Jesus than in this that has no real good support for it. And so tonight we're going to talk a little bit about this and then how it goes, but I would like to go just to another Bible verse, and that's 2 Corinthians 5:10, for we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ, that each one of us may receive the things done in the body according to what he has done, whether good or evil. And in life, you may or you may not get what you deserve. We have a justice system that tries to do things that are right. We have, natural consequences for some of our choices. You may end up in jail, but not everybody gets the punishment that they deserve in this life. And this worldview has no answer for that. They can't solve that problem. You can be Adolf Hitler, murder millions of people, and then you just die, which was what was going to happen to him anyways. But see, in a different worldview, in the Christian worldview, there's accountability for what you do in this life. In Genesis 1:24, and I'm going to also read 1:25, which isn't on the screen. Then God said, "Let earth bring forth the living creature according to its kind, cattle and creeping things and beasts of the earth, each according to its kind." And it was so. And God made the beasts of the earth according to its kind, cattle according to its kind, and everything creeps on the earth according to its kind. And God saw that it was good. And one of the things that I would like to point out about this verse is that God created everything that there is, and he did many of it on different days, but he did so according to its kind. So in a debate that I watched between Dr. Warren and Dr. Flew, Dr. Warren asked Flew, what happened? He's like, so we evolved from monkeys, is what Dr. Flew would believe. And he asks, so was there a mama ape or a mama monkey and a daddy monkey, and they gave birth to the first human? Or was a monkey or ape born, and in the course of its life, it evolved into a person? Because really, that's the only choice. If you believe in evolution, then monkeys or some sort of ape creatures had to give birth to a human, or an ape or ape creature was born that evolved into a human. That's the only way that you can get a person in the evolutionary view. And of course, Dr. Flew couldn't answer that. He didn't answer that. Because in either way, you're going to have to be asked for evidence. Now, I grew up on a farm. I didn't have a complex life, and I never saw puppies be given birth from a mommy cat. Horses don't give birth to cattle, and apes don't give birth to people. Because according to Genesis, to the laws that God laid out, everything gives birth to its kind, from its kind. And in Genesis 1:26, it says, then God let us make man in our own image, according to our likeness. Let him have dominion over the fish of the sea, over the birds of the air, and over the cattle, over all the earth, and over every creeping thing that creeps on the earth. So that God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. Now, I'm just going to take a little bit of moment just to maybe raise some awareness about this. But for some 6,000 years, animals were described by their type. They were classified by what they did. So fishes swim, birds fly. And in 1809, which is about 215 years ago, John Baptiste Lamarck classified animals differently. He did so by structures. Now, I believe there's some value to classifying animals by structure, knowing how they're organized and how they're formed. And I think there's some value to that, but I think some really bad has been done with that as well, because it puts man in the same class or the same thing as the animals, and that's not what the Bible describes at all. Because we have backbones, hair, and milk glands that would make us mammals, and then we're put in the primate order. But see, the sea creatures, the birds, and the cattle were all made at separate times, and man was made in the image of God, and he was given dominion over those. He is distinct from the animals. And so I think about this. I like to think about how, this is relatively a new way to classify animals, and I'm not just against it completely, but it answers some other things, like what swallowed Jonah? Well, if you classify animals the way the Bible classifies animals, that is very easy. And that whole debate just goes away, because of how animals define their classes in the Bible is different than modern science. Now, if you're going to go from monkeys to people, you have to have transitional forms. And here's a list of the so-called missing links that go from apes to people. And in my research, I found that supposedly my understanding is that evolutionary scientists don't use the term missing links. They prefer transitional forms. And I thought about that. And I'm like, that's probably true, because they probably don't want to miss that things are missing. But there was a time in my life that I looked at this and I'm like, wow, that's really overwhelming. Look at how scientific this is, and look at how many there are. And I'm like, what is this? And I started struggling with it. So I decided, well, I should research it. Transitional forms are kind of like half steps. So like you have a monkey, and then you have a human over here, and then in the middle you have transitional forms that go from one to the other. So we're going to talk about three, and I'm not going into great detail tonight, but I'm going to talk about three supposed transitional forms that go from people or from apes to humans. The first one is the Piltdown man. And I'm just going to kind of read this. This is from the internet, from Wikipedia. And it says the pit down man was a fraud, and it was put forth as fossilized body parts. And it was from the very early, it was suspicious that it wasn't true, but it was widely accepted. And it's interesting to me that there were serious doubts about this from the very beginning, but science just embraced it, or evolutionary scientists embraced it. Good science didn't embrace it. The next one, and so I'm kind of going, I did the top three. So I'm going to the next one. It's the Java man. Now, I don't have a picture of a Java man, but I do have a picture of a beautiful woman who likes Java. Now, the Britannica says that the Java man was found in Indonesia in 1890 by Eugene Du Bois, and he found two bones. He found a part of the skull cap, and he found a femur. And when he found these, he exclaimed that he had found the missing link. Now, he did not allow any other scientists to view these bones for more than 30 years. But the scientific community accepted him at his word that he had found the missing link. Some letters that he had wrote before his death, he conceded that this was a primate being and more ape-like than human. So this is two of the three that we'll talk about tonight. Now, when I was in Tennessee and we did our Tennessee trip, we got to do several interesting things. My cousin has a membership to this facility, which is about 20, 30 minutes outside of Nashville. It's very interesting. It used to be owned by Freed-Hardeman University, and they sold it to this man who has turned it into like a mini creation museum, and he does a lot of his own archaeological research, and it's very interesting. When you go through big rooms, and it was very evident that you wasn't in Alaska because it was just big, gigantic ceilings, big walkways that nothing was in, just big pathways, but in these rooms was all these different displays, and he did a really good job. And tonight, I'm going to talk a little bit about Lucy. But not that Lucy, this Lucy. So Lucy was discovered in 1974, and it's unusual among a lot of fossils because about 40% of it was found. And it was found by Don Johnson, and it was found in Ethiopia, and it's about 3 foot tall. And it's said to be the best example for the missing link in the human evolutionary tree. And I want to pause for a minute because that's what the evolutionary scientists say about Lucy. It is their best evidence for a transitional form to go from apes to people. And so as we kind of evaluate this, I would like for you to decide how good the evidence is that stacks up for Lucy to be a transitional form. Now, before I go on to the next slide, I'd like for you to look particularly to here and how few skull bones that they have. In the picture on the other side, those skull bones are highlighted or like a darker color so you can see where they fit or should fit into a skull. But that's all that there is of this skeleton, of this skull. But from that, you can go to books, magazines, scientific journals, and articles and see pictures like this. You know, I noticed something, I forget which magazine, but it was on the cover, is like, we finally know what Lucy looks like. And I looked at the cover, and it looked very ape, but it looked like Planet of the Apes, where they tried to make it look human, but then they gave her very distinct blue eyes. And here they've also made bluish eyes. For some reason, it just gets our imagination. But I want to go to the next slide because I want to show you 3 skulls. And when you look at these 3 skulls, I would like for you to look at and notice the angle of the cheekbone right here in relation to the front of the face. And you can see this angle is kind of like that. But when you go to a human skull, it's more straight. Now, this picture won't allow you to see some other angles of the skull, but if you notice, you can kind of see it. Humans' faces kind of are curved, meaning like this way, it has like a curve to it. So you can see from the side into where the eyes go. Over here, it's much harder to see it. And when I was doing research, you could see down from the top in a lot of the photos, which I should have put up here. But you can see not inside. But look at the angle here and the angle here relative to this. And if you notice here, there's humans have a little bit of a nose bone and then cartilage after that. They don't have that. Then look at the size and the teeth. Now, in recent years, they've taken the few bones from Lucy that they found and scanned them into computers. Now, this is more recent. And they asked the computer to generate what it thinks the skull should look like. Meaning that if this bone here fits here, what other skulls do we know of that has a similar shape, and what should the next piece look like? And guess what the computer's built? So if you have something that is a computer that's unbiased, creates this, and you compare this to this and that, which one does it look more like? There's a few more things about Lucy that I would like to cover. When we were there at the Wonder Center, they had this display, and I was really looking at it, and they had different hands that were up there, human hands and chimpanzee hands and ape hands and feet, talking about different ways your hands move and the different bone structures. I was very fascinated. And my kids was over, and I think it was Daniel, and he was like, Dad, explain this to me and explain that to me. And I was trying to talk, I was trying to read and then summarize and explain and answer other questions along with it. And then out of the periphery of my vision, this guy walks up. So I kind of finish, and I look at him, and it's the guy who's playing in all the movies around the museum. And he says, y'all have questions? And I'm like, yeah, this young man has a question about the skull. So he proceeded to talk about Lucy, and he says how it's really esteemed to be the best example that we have of transitional forms. And he said one of the problems, though, is that many of the bones that you would use initially to quickly determine if it was a chimpanzee or an ape or human, those bones are missing, the hands, the feet, and much of the skull. He also said that, he said this is by far conclusive to anything. He says, but all the long bones are fractured. And he says other bones in the pelvis and the long bones looks like this creature fell from 4 to 5 stories. And he says, so it's very indicative of a 50-ish foot fall. And so he says it could have been from a tree, but we don't really know. It could also be off a cliff too, but that doesn't really help us one way or the other. But it does show that there was a lot of damage to the skeleton. The leg socket angle, when you put the femur up into the pelvis, which there's not a lot there to work with, but it better fits when you put it at the angle of a chimpanzee. There was fractures in the hip bones, and so chimpanzees and apes and different animals and humans have different angles for how the hip bones go together. This one was altered. It was originally fractured, but they put it back together, but it didn't fit the way they thought it should fit, so they used an angle grinder to make it be right. This bone right here has had hundreds of thousands of dollars spent on it to study that one particular bone. Lots and lots of grant money went to studying that bone because they couldn't figure out how to get all the pieces together and to get it into the skull and to set the skull on top of the head so that Lucy can walk upright. Well, after spending hundreds of thousands of dollars on it, they realized that that bone doesn't match the skeleton. It's from something else. And when they try to put the best they can, the vertebrates in the skull feed into the back of the skull, unlike ours that comes into the bottom. Now, there's still a big debate about a lot of the stuff that I'm saying, and this one's also debated. but Lucy is probably a boy. So we also, and then the last point about Lucy is that, you know, there are very well-known atheists that say that this is just a chimpanzee that is now extinct. Now, when you think about this, this is their best evidence of this transitional forms to go from apes to people. There was something else that was brought out in the Wonder Center that we went to, this Creation Museum in Dixon, Tennessee. And he had population statistics and possibly estimates for how many people were on the earth during the flood and all these different things. But one thing that just kind of caught my eye is he had a whole section, little area, and that if man has been around for 300,000 years, there should be a whole lot more remains. But since there's so few human remains, that is a little bit of a suggestion that we have not been around that long. As we come to a close tonight, I want you to think about this evidence and these thoughts and just kind of reflect. But I also want you to think about Jesus. You know, John 3:16 talks about God loving us so much that his love for us was so great that he sent his son to die for us. God didn't die for monkeys to go to heaven. God died for us to go to heaven so that if we are made right with him, we can expend eternity with him. If you're subject to the invitation, please come forward at this time while we sing the invitation song.